July 20th, 1969. It's a date, isn't it? Just etched into our collective memory. You picture the lunar module, the Eagle, settling onto that ancient, dusty surface of the moon. And inside, you've got Commander Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, poised, right on the edge of, well, changing everything. But here's something most people don't know about that exact moment, that incredibly tense moment right before the big leap. There was this silent danger already unfolding.
That's right. A really chilling detail, actually. Armstrong's getting ready to leave the LM, struggling a bit with his bulky suit in that tight space. The air pressure inside is pushing the hatch out. It's tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He finally gets it open, but as he maneuvers out, his backpack, his life support system, brushes against the control panel. There's no sound, obviously, no air, but this tiny vital piece, a circuit breaker, just snaps off.
Oh, wow.
And this wasn't just, some random bit of plastic. This was the ascent engine arming switch, the main switch to fire up the engine to get them off the moon.
So basically their ride home.
Exactly. Their primary way back to orbit, back to Earth, was suddenly broken. A completely silent, terrifying problem right at the very moment the world was waiting for one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That is genuinely chilling. A near disaster, literally seconds before the triumph. And yet, even with all the evidence, all the stories, there's still this nagging question for some people. Did it actually happen?
The skepticism lingers.
So welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are plunging right into the Apollo 11 mission. We're going to unpack the real story, look at the surprising politics behind it all, the Cold War stuff. We'll dissect the incredible technology, relive those nail-biting moments, the near misses.
Yeah, the moments that make you hold your breath even now.
Exactly. And we'll tackle those conspiracy theories head-on with the facts. And finally, uncover some of the maybe hidden benefits that actually affect our lives today, ways you might not even realize.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is how this mission wasn't just about science. It was this melting pot, wasn't it? Human ingenuity, sheer resilience, and that intense global rivalry all mixed together.
Right.
We're going to explore how these little incidents like that broken switch you mentioned or, last-minute landing changes, even a president having a what if they don't make it back speech written.
Yeah, that's sobering.
It all weaves together into a story that's honestly far more dramatic and more compelling than any made-up conspiracy could ever be. It really did reshape how we saw the cosmos, but also how things worked right here on Earth.
Okay, so let's rewind right back to the beginning, because the real push for Apollo 11, it wasn't just, starry-eyed scientists wanting to explore. As romantic as that sounds,
Not purely.
it was fundamentally driven by that intense rivalry, the Cold War, America versus the Soviet Union, this relentless space race. It was less about pure discovery, maybe, and more about proving who was top dog, technologically speaking, whose system was superior.
Yeah, and you absolutely have to grasp just how much the Soviets were winning in the early days. They kept hitting these major milestones first, sending shockwaves through the U.S.
Right, like Sputnik.
Exactly. October 1957. The first artificial satellite. That wasn't just a tech win, it was a huge psychological blow. Suddenly, Americans are looking up, hearing the Soviet beep, beep, beep overhead.
Kind of scary when you think about it.
It fueled real fear. If they can put a satellite up, maybe they can launch missiles across continents. It immediately kicks off this massive rethink of American science, education, defense spending, everything.
Okay, so the pressure cooker starts building. And then just a few years later, bam, April 1961, Yuri Gagarin, first human in space.
Another huge victory for the Soviets, another major blow to American prestige. It really cemented this idea in the public mind and probably in politicians' minds too, that the USSR was leading the way in space. The urgency in the U.S. just ramped up massively.
So the U.S. has to respond. How did Kennedy handle it?
He acted fast. Less than a week after Gagarin's flight, Kennedy, feeling that immense pressure, writes this really urgent memo to his VP, Lyndon Johnson, April 20th, 1961.
Okay.
And he's not messing around. He's basically asking, point blank, how do we beat the Soviets? He specifically asks about, a trip around the moon, or is there some other big space project we could do fast, something dramatic to get America back in the lead.
So he's looking for that big symbolic win.
Precisely, which leads directly to that famous speech he gives just over a month later, May 25th, 1961, to Congress. And that's where he throws down the gauntlet. He makes that incredibly audacious promise.
The big one.
To land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before this decade is out. I mean, just think about that commitment. It was extraordinary, almost unbelievable at the time.
It really was. You have to put yourself back in 1961. I mean, forget smartphones and the internet.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't even have GPS. Computers were these giant room-filling things, slower than, I don't know, your microwave probably.
Huh. Probably right. Less processing power than a modern toaster, easily.
So to promise a moon landing within 9 years with that level of technology, it was just mind-bogglingly ambitious. It really was a leap of faith, wasn't it?
A huge leap, like saying you're going to build a tunnel under the Atlantic with, shovels.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just talk. He backed it up with serious cash. Right away, an extra $7 to $9 billion over the next 5 years for the space program.
Which was an enormous amount of money back then.
Yeah.
We're talking something like 4% of the entire federal budget.
Wow.
It basically focused almost the entire space agency, all its people, all its resources, onto this one single, incredibly difficult goal. It showed this massive national will. It was politics, ideology, technology, all driving towards the moon.
Okay, so the goal is set. Impossible sounding, but set. NASA doesn't just sit back, they jump into action, right?
Yeah.
Methodically.
Oh, absolutely, with incredible focus. They started with the basics, the real fundamentals.
Yeah.
Think about it, just months after Kennedy's speech, they're already deep into rigorous testing.
What kind of stuff first?
Well, the rockets themselves, obviously, those huge Saturn boosters. Then, the heat shields for the command modules vital for surviving re-entry, right? They had to know exactly how much heat those things could take.
Makes sense. Critical stuff.
And the propulsion systems for the service modules, the engines needed for course corrections in space.
Oh.
All of it had to be tested relentlessly.
And this was mostly unmanned at first.
Yeah, primarily. From about 1963 to 67, tons of unmanned tests. They weren't just shooting things up randomly. Each launch was a specific experiment. Gather data, tweak the design, prove reliability step by step. You had to do that before you put people on top of these things.
But then, tragedy struck. The Apollo 1 fire.
Yeah, devastating moment. Early 1967, they were gearing up for the first manned flight of the Apollo program, Apollo 1. 3 really experienced astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee.
Heroes already.
Absolutely. But during a routine ground test, a launch rehearsal on the pad, January 27th, a fire breaks out inside the capsule. And tragically, because of a combination of factors, the pure oxygen atmosphere they used then, design flaws like an inward opening hatch they couldn't open quickly. All 3 men died. It was horrific. A profound shock to NASA, to the country. It could have easily stopped the whole program right there.
How did NASA respond to something so awful?
It was a real moment of crisis, but also, I think, showed their character. The loss was immense. The public criticism was sharp. But NASA didn't flinch, didn't hide. They conducted this incredibly thorough, painful, but transparent investigation.
Right.
They found every single contributing factor, bad wiring, flammable materials, the hatch design, and they fixed them. Hundreds of safety changes were made.
Yeah.
They redesigned the capsule, changed procedures, completely rethought their approach to risk. It showed incredible resilience and dedication, honestly. They were determined it wouldn't happen again.
And then, after that pause, the pace they picked up,
Yeah.
it's almost unbelievable. It feels like a speed run.
It really does.
Yeah.
Like watching a time lapse. After those safety changes, they resumed unmanned tests. Apollo 4, 5, 6, proving the new designs worked. Then bang! October 1968, Apollo 7. Manned flight returns. The redesigned capsule is safe. Huge relief.
Just 2 months later.
December 68, Apollo 8. They don't just go into Earth orbit. They send 3 astronauts all the way around the moon. 10 orbits. Humanity gets its first look at Earthrise. Mind-blowing.
Incredible.
Then just 3 months after that, March 69, Apollo 9. They test the lunar module, the Eagle, in Earth orbit. Practice docking, undocking, all the critical maneuvers.
And then the final dress rehearsal.
May 69. Just 8 weeks before Apollo 11, Apollo 10. They fly the lunar module down to within 9 miles of the moon's surface. Practice everything, navigation, communication, procedures, everything except the actual landing.
Wow. So literally mission after mission every 2 or 3 months, refining, practicing, pushing closer.
Exactly. Methodical, relentless progression. Each mission building perfectly on the last, de-risking every single step of that incredibly complex journey. It showed an unparalleled focus on that one audacious goal.
And then the day arrives. All that preparation, all that pressure culminates. July 16th, 1969, that monster Saturn V rocket ignites. The whole world is watching, listening, and you hear it. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
An iconic moment. Goosebumps even thinking about it.
Apollo 11 is finally on its way, and aboard, those 3 names that became legendary. Commander Neil Armstrong, 38 years old, cool as ice. Command Module pilot Michael Collins and Lunar Module pilot Buzz Aldrin.
3 incredibly skilled individuals entrusted with this monumental task.
And it's funny, isn't it? Armstrong and Aldrin are household names, but Michael Collins, maybe less so. Why is that?
It's fascinating, yeah. And it highlights the mission's design. Collins' job was maybe the loneliest, but absolutely crucial. While Armstrong and Aldrin went down in the lunar module, the Eagle,
He stayed up top.
he stayed orbiting the moon completely alone in the command module, Columbia. His job was to be their ride home. He had to be in the exact right place at the exact right time for the Eagle to rendezvous and dock after it left the moon.
So if he messes up.
If he messes up or if Columbia has a problem, Armstrong and Aldrin are stranded. Game over. He couldn't bring them back. So his role, while less visible maybe, was arguably just as critical. Those 27 hours he spent orbiting the moon solo. Incredible skill and composure required.
It really puts his contribution in perspective. And the spacecraft itself, this whole contraption, it's just an engineering masterpiece.
Oh, completely. You had those 3 main parts working together, Columbia, the command module, Collins' little home and control center. Attached was the service module powerhouse, engines, life support, and then the lunar module, the Eagle, that kind of fragile-looking 2-stage lander designed only to operate at the moon.
And all of that launched by the Saturn V.
That beast. 3 million kilograms at launch, carrying 1 million gallons of fuel, kerosene, liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. The sheer control power is just staggering to comprehend.
So they lift off. What's the journey like? How long does it take?
It's incredibly fast at first, less than 10 minutes to get into Earth orbit. They do about 1.5 loops around the Earth, final checks. Then, maybe 5 hours after launch, Mission Control gives the go for TLI, translunar injection.
That's the burn to head for the moon.
Exactly. A big engine burn from the service module kicks them out of Earth orbit, sends them on their way. Then it's several days coasting through space, almost 400,000 kilometers, eating, sleeping, taking photos, just traveling towards the moon. Imagine that view.
Unbelievable. Okay, skip ahead. July 19th, they arrive. What happens next?
They fire engines to slow down and enter lunar orbit. Then comes the separation. Collins stays in Columbia. Armstrong and Aldrin climb into the Eagle, undock, and begin their descent towards the surface. Planned landing time, around 8 p.m. Houston time.
And this is where things get really tense, right? The alarms.
Yeah. About 10 minutes into the descent, maybe 8:10 p.m., suddenly these alarms start blaring in the cockpit. 12:01, then 12:02.
And they didn't know what they meant.
Nope. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin recognized those codes immediately. You can hear the calmness in their voices on the recordings, but underneath, immense pressure. They radio the codes down to Houston.
And mission control.
Mission control, specifically a young flight controller named Steve Bales, supported by his team, including Jack Garman, who knew the codes, had to make a split-second call. And amazingly, they tell the crew, ignore it, keep going, we're go-go. Same type, we're go.
3 alarms during lunar descent, that sounds crazy.
It does. But thankfully, the lunar module's guidance computer, while primitive by our standards, was incredibly well designed for this.
Okay, so what were the alarms? What was happening?
There weren't system failures, which is key. The codes, 12:01 and 12:02, meant the computer was overloaded. It was trying to process too much data at once, handling the landing calculations and tracking data from the rendezvous radar, which wasn't actually needed at that moment, but was mistakenly left on.
Ah, so it was getting swamped.
Exactly, like your laptop trying to run too many programs. But this computer was built tough. It had this brilliant priority scheduling. When it got overloaded, it automatically dropped lower priority tasks, like processing that extra radar data, to ensure the essential programs, the ones needed for landing guidance and engine control, kept running smoothly.
Wow. So the design saved them.
That robust design and the quick thinking in mission control to recognize it wasn't fatal absolutely saved the landing right there. They trusted the system.
But the drama wasn't over. Not by a long shot.
No way. They get down to about 150 meters, maybe 500 feet above the surface. And Armstrong, looking out his little triangular window, realizes the automatic landing system is taking them straight towards a crater filled with huge boulders, car-sized rocks.
Oh, man. Bad spot to land?
Terrible spot. Could have damaged the LM, tipped it over. So with literally seconds to react, Armstrong does what great pilots do. He takes manual control. He overrides the computer.
Just like that.
Just like that. Starts flying the LM manually, horizontally, searching for a clear patch, dodging craters and rocks. He ends up flying about 4 miles past the original target zone, looking for somewhere safe.
While burning precious fuel.
Exactly. And that's the next crisis, 8:16 p.m. As Armstrong is still maneuvering, Aldrin calls out the fuel level. Quantity light, Only 5% fuel remained.
5%? That sounds critically low.
It was. Mission Control starts the countdown. They had rules. Hit a certain fuel level, you have to abort. They call out 60 seconds of fuel left, then 30 seconds. If they didn't land by the time the 30 seconds ran out, they'd have to fire the ascend engine and get out of there.
The tension must have been unbearable, downstairs in Houston, upstairs in the Eagle.
Absolutely thick with tension. They are so close. And then, with literally just those 30 seconds, maybe even less remaining, Armstrong finds his spot. And he radios down those calm, iconic words. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Wow. Just wow. What a sequence. Alarms, computer overload, manual override, near fatal boulder field, down to the last drops of fuel. It really wasn't easy, was it?
Not even slightly. It shows incredible skill, composure under unimaginable pressure, and maybe just a little bit of luck, too.
So the Eagle has landed. History made. After letting the dust settle, literally, and running through checklists, Neil Armstrong gets ready, opens the hatch, climbs down that ladder, and makes the first human footprint on another world.
And delivers that line. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Heard by an estimated 650 million people watching live on TV. Unbelievable. Buzz Aldrin joins him soon after. They're on the moon.
And while, yes, the Cold War got them there, this wasn't just about planting a flag, you know. There were real solid scientific goals for this mission, too.
Right. What did they actually do during that time on the surface? It wasn't that long, was it?
About 2.5 hours outside the LM. But they packed a lot in. They were incredibly busy. Collecting samples was a big one. They gathered about 23 kilograms, that's around 50 pounds, of moon rocks and lunar soil. Carefully documented, too.
For scientists back on Earth.
Exactly. Plus, they took tons of photographs, documenting the landscape, the geology, their activities, capturing that stark alien beauty.
And they set up experiments, too, didn't they? Not just picking up rocks.
Yeah, several important scientific instruments. First off, that TV camera that let everyone watch live, that itself was a feat, working in the lunar environment's extremes.
Okay, what else?
They deployed something called the Solar Wind Composition Experiment. Basically a sheet of special foil designed to trap particles blowing off the solar wind. Gave us data about the sun and how it interacts with the moon. Then there was the laser-ranging retroreflector. This was really cool, a panel of special mirrors. Scientists on Earth could shoot laser beams at it, and the mirrors would reflect the beam straight back. By timing the round trip, they could measure the Earth-Moon distance with incredible precision.
Wow, and we still use that data.
Absolutely. It helps us understand the moon's orbit, its wobble, even test theories like general relativity. And finally, they set up a seismometer.
To detect moonquakes.
Exactly. To listen for tremors inside the moon. It gave us our first clues that the moon wasn't geologically dead, that it had internal activity. Helped us start figuring out its internal structure.
So a lot of cells packed into a short walk. And they left things behind too, right? The flag, of course.
The flag, yes. And a commemorative plaque on the leg of the lunar module's descent stage. It read, "Here, men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." A lasting marker of that moment.
It really shows that even with the politics, there was this deeper drive for knowledge, for understanding our place in the universe.
Definitely. The science from Apollo 11 and the later missions fundamentally changed our understanding of the moon, its origin, its history, its composition. Those samples and data are still being studied today. It truly went beyond the flag planting. It became a cornerstone of planetary science.
Okay, so the moonwalk is over. Samples collected, experiments running. Armstrong and Aldrin climb back into the Eagle. Time to go home. But now, that broken switch comes back to haunt them.
Right. The ascent engine arming switch. The one Armstrong's backpack snapped off when he first went out.
Yeah.
They're back inside, running through the pre-launch checklist, and they realize this switch is broken. And without it, the main engine needed to lift them off the moon.
Right.
Won't fire.
Seriously, so they're actually stranded after all that?
For a terrifying moment, yes.
Hmm?
The engine needed that specific electrical circuit completed, and the switch was designed to do that. They're stuck. On the moon, hundreds of thousands of miles away. No way for mission control to physically fix it.
What do they do? Panic?
Apparently not. This is where Buzz Aldrin has this incredible moment of clarity, of sheer ingenuity. He starts looking around the cockpit for something, anything, that could bridge the contacts in the broken switch housing.
Oh, okay.
And what does he find? His felt tip pen, a simple ballpoint pen.
No way, a pen.
He figured the metal casing, or maybe the tip mechanism, might be conductive enough and the right size to push into the breaker slot and complete the circuit.
Did it work?
He jammed it in there,
Yeah.
and it worked. The circuit completed. They could arm the ascent engine. That humble pen literally saved the mission right there. Just an amazing example of thinking on your feet under unbelievable pressure.
That is one of the best stories from the whole mission. Resourcefulness level.
Expert.
Absolutely.
So, with the pen trick, the Eagle's ascent stage successfully lifts off, leaving the descent stage behind.
Good.
They rendezvous with Michael Collins in Columbia, dock perfectly, transfer the samples and themselves back into the command module, and jettison the Eagle. Now they're heading back to Earth.
Smooth sailing from there. Please tell me it was smooth sailing.
If only. There was still one more major scare waiting for them right near the end.
Oh, come on. What now?
Okay, so before re-entering Earth's atmosphere, they need to separate the command module, where they are, from the service module, the big cylindrical part with the main engine and supplies. The service module is supposed to burn up harmlessly.
Right.
To make sure it doesn't, crash into them after separation, there are small thrusters designed to push the service module safely away. But when they separated, those thrusters failed. They didn't fire.
So the service module is just floating there, next to them.
Worse, it started tumbling and breaking apart as it hit the upper atmosphere right alongside them. They're inside Columbia, basically helpless, watching this huge piece of machinery disintegrate around them. Debris is flying everywhere.
That sounds terrifying. Could a piece have hit them?
Easily. A single piece of debris hitting Columbia's heat shield or hull at that speed could have been catastrophic. It was, frankly, a miracle that nothing hit them. Just pure luck, it seems, that they flew through the debris field unscathed. It shows just how many things could still go wrong, even minutes from home.
Unbelievable. The risks were just constant, which maybe explains why President Nixon had that backup speech ready.
Exactly. That speech, titled An Event of Moon Disaster, it's chilling to read.
Can you share a bit of it? It really underscores the stakes.
Sure. It reads, in part, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." He names Armstrong and Aldrin. These brave men know that there is no hope for their recovery. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding.
Wow, just wow. It really brings home how close to disaster they were perceived to be, right up to the end.
It does. It acknowledges the profound risks everyone knew they were taking. But thankfully, that speech stayed in a drawer. Columbia re-entered safely, parachutes deployed perfectly, splashed down in the Pacific. And against all those odds, overcoming problems at almost every stage, all three astronauts were home, alive and well.
But they couldn't just go home, could they? There was the quarantine.
Right. After surviving space, the moon, re-entry,
Yeah.
they get put into isolation for 2 weeks.
Why? Were they worried about moon germs?
Essentially, yeah. It sounds a bit sci-fi now, but back then, nobody knew for sure if there might be unknown microorganisms, pathogens on the moon that could be dangerous to life on Earth. So as an extreme precaution, they were quarantined, just in case.
And any space bugs?
Thankfully, no, nothing harmful came back with them, but it shows just how careful NASA was trying to be about every single possible risk, known and unknown.
Okay, so we've walked through this incredible, perilous, ultimately successful journey. Yet, as we mentioned, more than 50 years on, you still hear it all the time. The moon landing was faked.
The conspiracy theories persist. The idea that it was all staged, maybe in a Hollywood studio, by the U.S. government.
It does seem to capture the imagination, even if it overshadows the reality. So let's tackle some of the big claims people make. How do we know it wasn't faked?
Well, probably the single strongest piece of evidence against a fake landing comes from, ironically, the Soviet Union.
Their biggest rival, how so?
Think about it. This was the height of the Cold War. If America had faked the moon landing to win the space race, the Soviets had every motivation, political, ideological, and certainly the technical means, with their own tracking stations and intelligence, to expose it as a massive fraud. It would have been the propaganda coup of the century for them.
Right. They would have shouted it from the rooftops.
You'd think so, but they didn't. In fact, the historical record is clear. The Soviet Union publicly acknowledged the American moon landing as real. Their own official publications, like the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, listed it as a factual event, the third great milestone after Sputnik and Gagarin.
So the fact that the people with the most to gain from exposing a fake didn't expose it, that's pretty powerful.
It's extremely compelling evidence, yes. Why would they concede defeat if they knew it was a hoax?
Okay, but what about the evidence the theorists point to? The classic one is the flag. It's waving, there's no wind on the moon. It must be fake.
Ah, yes, the fluttering flag. This one's actually quite simple once you know how the flag was designed. It wasn't supposed to just hang there limp like a flag on Earth with no wind.
So it was designed to look like it was waving.
Sort of. It had the normal vertical pole, but it also had a horizontal telescoping pole sewn into a ham along the top edge. The idea was to extend this top pole fully so the flag would be stretched out and visible like it was flying proudly.
Okay.
But on Apollo 11, they had trouble extending that horizontal pole all the way. It got a bit stuck. So the fabric bunched up, creating natural wrinkles and folds. That's what makes it look rippled or wavy.
So the ripples are just wrinkles, not fluttering.
Exactly. And if you watch the video footage closely, when the astronauts aren't touching it or bumping it, the flag is perfectly still. When they do move it, it might jiggle a bit because of the inertia in the poles acting like springs, but it doesn't flutter like it would in wind.
Got it. What about the photos? People say, where are the stars? If you're in space, shouldn't the sky be full of stars?
Another one based on a misunderstanding of photography. Remember, they landed during the lunar day. The sun was shining brightly on the moon's surface.
Okay. Very bright conditions.
Extremely bright. And the astronauts' white spacesuits were also highly reflective. To take properly exposed photos of the bright lunar surface and the astronauts, they had to use very fast shutter speeds and small lens apertures. Which means there wasn't nearly enough light coming from the faint, distant stars to register on the film. It's the same reasons you can't see stars during the day on Earth, or why if you take a flash photo of someone at night, the dark background often looks black. The camera settings are optimized for the bright foreground subject. The stars were there, just too faint to be captured in those specific photos.
That makes sense.
Hey.
Like trying to see stars next to a floodlight. Okay, next one. The shadows. Theorists claim the shadows look weird. They go in different directions, implying multiple light sources like studio lights.
Yeah, the shadow argument, again, it comes down to the unique lunar environment. The sun was the main light source, yes, but it wasn't the only significant source of illumination.
What else was there?
The moon's surface itself. The lunar soil, or regolith, is actually very reflective. Sunlight hitting the ground was bouncing off and scattering in all directions, filling in some of the shadows and illuminating areas that wouldn't be lit if the sun were the only source.
Ah, so reflected light from the ground messes with the shadows.
Exactly. That scattered light, combined with the lack of atmosphere to diffuse light further and the uneven terrain with craters and rocks, creates complex shadow patterns that can look wrong or inconsistent if you're expecting simple parallel shadows from a single distant light source. But it's entirely consistent with physics on an airless, reflective body.
Okay, one more. There's that famous photo of Aldrin, and you see Armstrong reflected in his visor. Some say Armstrong looks like he's holding a camera, but then who took the pictures of Armstrong coming down the ladder?
Right, the who filmed the cameraman question. Simple answers again. First, the camera wasn't handheld. The astronauts had Hasselblad cameras mounted on chest brackets on their suits. That's what you see in the reflection.
Yeah.
They operated them mostly hands-free.
Ah, mounted on the suit. Got it.
And as for who filmed Armstrong's first steps, multiple cameras were mounted externally on the lunar module's descent stage, specifically positioned to capture the ladder and the area around it. So no paradox, just well-planned camera placements. Each of these anomalies has a perfectly logical, scientific explanation rooted in the conditions and technology of the mission.
It's great to clear those up. But, even back then when the mission happened, not everyone was throwing confetti. There was significant criticism, wasn't there? Especially about the cost.
Oh, definitely. That waste of money argument was very prominent even before Apollo 11. There was a famous New York Times article back in 1962 that calculated the money projected for the moon program could build something like 120 universities the size of Harvard.
Wow, that's a stark comparison.
It really puts the critique in perspective. People were looking at serious problems right here on Earth: poverty, inequality, the growing conflict in Vietnam, and asking quite reasonably from their point of view, why are we spending billions to go to the moon when we have urgent needs right here?
And did that feeling grow over time?
Yeah. Yes, particularly as the Apollo program continued after the initial landing. By the early 1970s, the initial public fascination had definitely cooled. The Vietnam War was dragging on, costing lives and money. Domestic issues felt more pressing. For many average Americans, the space program started to look like an expensive luxury, maybe even a distraction. The thrill was gone, replaced by questions about value for money.
But that's where the story gets more complex, right? Because there were these hidden benefits, things nobody really anticipated.
Exactly, the spin-off technologies. Things developed because of the intense demands of the Apollo program that ended up having huge impacts back on Earth, often in completely unexpected ways. And maybe the biggest, most world-changing example is the development of the computer chip.
Now, this is fascinating. How did going to the moon accelerate the computer revolution? That seems like a leap.
It's a direct link. Okay, so the integrated circuit, the microchip, was invented in the late 50s. But in the early 60s, they were really expensive, seen as kind of experimental, maybe unreliable. Big companies like IBM were hesitant to use them in their mainstream computers.
Okay, new tech, early days.
Right. But NASA, for the Apollo guidance computers, needed immense computing power in a tiny, lightweight, low-power package. They couldn't use bulky vacuum tubes or even early transistors. They needed integrated circuits, and they needed them to be incredibly reliable.
So NASA became a demanding customer.
A massively demanding customer. They placed huge orders for these early integrated circuits, tens of thousands of them. This enormous guaranteed demand essentially kick-started the industry. It forced companies like Fairchild and Texas Instruments to figure out mass production, to improve quality control, to innovate like crazy.
And that drove the price down.
Dramatically. The price of integrated circuits plummeted by over 90% in just a few years because of NASA's bulk orders. Suddenly, they became affordable for other industry.
And it also proved they worked, right?
That's the other crucial part. The moon landing was the ultimate reliability test. If these tiny chips could guide astronauts to the moon and back, navigating complex maneuvers, surviving launch vibrations, radiation, temperature swings, well, then they were obviously reliable enough for everyday use on Earth.
It gave everyone confidence in the technology.
Exactly. It overcame that initial hesitancy. The success of Apollo basically validated the integrated circuit. And after that, the technology just exploded. It grew exponentially, leading directly to the personal computers, smartphones, and all the digital technology that defines our world today. It's hard to overstate Apollo's impact there.
That's incredible. A direct line from the moon race to the device you might be listening to us on right now. Were there other big spin-offs?
Tons of them, big and small. Things we often take for granted. Think about Velcro, not invented by NASA, but Apollo used so much of it on suits inside the capsule to hold things down that it drove mass production and made it cheap and common.
Huh. Velcro. Okay, what else?
Memory foam. Developed by NASA contractors for aircraft seats, better crash protection, cushioning during G-forces. Now it's in mattresses, pillows, medical gear.
Yeah, everywhere.
Freeze-dried food. Perfected for lightweight, long-lasting astronaut meals. Now essential for camping, emergency supplies, the advanced water purification systems needed for recycling water on long missions. Those technologies influence filters we use today.
Wow.
Even medical imaging. The techniques NASA developed to process and clarify faint signals and images from space, like those moon photos, were foundational for things like CTANs and MRIs, improving how we see inside the human body.
That's amazing.
And fire-resistant materials. After the Apollo 1 fire, NASA pushed heavily for safer materials for suits and spacecraft. That research led to fabrics now used in firefighters' gear, racing suits, aircraft interiors. The list goes on and on. Apollo wasn't just about the moon. It was this incredible engine for innovation across the board.
So, despite all those amazing spin-offs, the program did end. Apollo 17, December 1972. That was the last time humans walked on the moon. Why did we stop going, especially if it was driving so much innovation?
I think the sheer scale and cost are the simplest answers. We mentioned the workforce, over 400,000 people involved at its peak, and the price tag. $24 billion back then, which is well over $100 billion in today's money.
Just a staggering investment.
It really was. An investment driven by a very specific goal, beating the Soviets to the moon. Once that goal was achieved, and with the rising costs of Vietnam and domestic issues, maintaining that level of spending just wasn't politically sustainable.
The public support wasn't there anymore.
Exactly. The initial excitement faded. The cost seemed too high for missions that felt perhaps repetitive to the public eye. NASA had plans for Apollo 18, 19, even 20, but the funding was cut due to that shift in public and political priorities. Human lunar exploration went dormant for almost half a century.
But now there's talk again, a real push to go back.
Yes, there's definitely been a major resurgence in interest in recent years. It started building momentum, and then in 2017, President Trump formally announced a policy shift towards returning astronauts to the moon, initially aiming for 2024. The focus has evolved since then, but it marked a clear change.
And NASA now has the Artemis program. What's the plan there? Is it just Apollo revisited?
No, Artemis is significantly different. It's much more ambitious in the long run. The goal isn't just short visits, planting flags and footprints. It's about establishing a sustained human presence on the moon. Think research outposts, utilizing lunar resources.
Using the moon as a base.
Exactly. As a proving ground for technologies needed for even deeper space missions, like eventually going to Mars. Artemis has already started with unmanned tests, like Artemis I orbiting the moon. Artemis II will be a manned flyby, and then Artemis III aims to land humans back on the surface, hopefully around 2025 or 2026.
And there's a focus on diversity this time too, right?
A very explicit focus. Artemis aims to land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. It reflects a much broader, more inclusive vision for who gets to participate in space exploration.
So you're confident we'll see boots back on the moon soon, before this decade is out?
I am, yes.
Yeah.
Very confident. The momentum is there. The technology has advanced incredibly reusable rockets, advanced computing, materials science, and there's renewed strategic interest globally. It's not just NASA. Commercial companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are major players now. International partners are involved.
Why go back now? What are the strategic reasons?
Several key ones. Science, for sure, studying lunar geology, searching for water ice at the poles, which could be a game changer for future missions, providing water, air, even rocket fuel. Technology development, learning to live and work sustainably off Earth. Building the Gateway, a small space station in lunar orbit, as a staging post. And yes, geopolitics still plays a role, demonstrating capability and leadership. But it feels more collaborative and long-term focused this time.
So it's about building a real future in space, using the moon as the next step.
That's the vision. A sustainable return, leading eventually towards Mars and beyond.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time for lunar exploration again. #tagoutro.
Well, what an incredible journey we've covered today. From that fierce Cold War race that sparked it all, to the sheer triumph of Apollo 11, navigating those unbelievable challenges and near disasters. We've looked at the evidence that counters the persistent myths and uncovered just how much that giant leap impacted technology right here on Earth in ways most of us probably never realized, from the chips in our pockets to the foam in our beds.
It really is a story of audacity, incredible engineering, human ingenuity under pressure, and maybe a bit of sheer luck, too. Pushing boundaries far beyond what seemed possible.
Absolutely. And it leaves us and you listening with a really interesting thought to chew on, doesn't it? We've talked about the immense costs, the huge risks, both back then with Apollo and looking forward now with Artemis. We've also seen these amazing, unforeseen long-term benefits.
Yeah, that complex trade-off.
So the question for you to ponder is, what responsibility do we have as a society when we decide to pursue these incredibly ambitious, expensive, risky goals like space exploration? How do we balance those grand visions, that drive to explore and discover, with the very real, immediate needs we face right here on Earth, especially when those amazing hidden benefits might take decades to actually show up?
It's a tough balance, isn't it? There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
How much do we invest in the future, in the unknown, versus tackling the problems right in front of us? Apollo 11 remains such a powerful, relevant case study in that ongoing global conversation, something to definitely think about.